Hi there, Bobo here. This is brought to you by the number 9. It's not a 6. We've already read chapter 6. This is chapter 9. If you remember what happened last time, we had that horrible Mrs. Sheets show up at Nancy's front door, saying that she wanted the $10 that was somehow lost out of poor Mr. Dixon's mail pouch when it was taken. She's married to old Sailor Joe, I think that's his name, and she wants this. She wants this $10 back. This chapter is entitled "Two Slender Clues." Hannah answered the phone. Remember that we were all there in the doorway. Mrs. Sheets was making a big scene about things, yelling and screaming. And fortunately, Hannah heard the telephone and she answered the phone. While Nancy held the door open for the wordy Mrs. Sheets. "You needn't hustle me out now," that woman continued to sputter. "Certainly the young folks of today isn't taught no manners at all. When I was a girl, we was taught to know our places. There's a very important phone call from Miss Nancy Drew," Hannah announced grandly. "Terribly important and terribly confidential." "Excuse me then," Nancy said, and turned from the door to answer the telephone. Beth saw with considerable satisfaction how Hannah gave Mrs. Sheets a far from gentle shove and shut the door in her face with what was close to an absolute slam. "How you going to keep your temper is beyond me," Hannah muttered, as much to herself as to Nancy. "Now I'll warm the soup and make some more toast." Good old Bess. The housekeeper stalked grandly from the hall, conscious that she had routed the enemy. Meanwhile, Nancy, her ear to the receiver, was listening to a recital which made her heart beat faster. "This is Ira Dixon, the mailman, Miss Nancy. I thought I'd call you up. Edgar, my half-brother, was just in to see me. He came in his car. He said as soon as he'd read in the newspaper about the robbery." Yes, Nancy cried. "Go on." "Miss Nancy, that boy had nothing to do with my hard luck. I'm sure of that," the postman continued. "Why, he was as sympathetic as you are yourself, and he tried to get me to give him some of my money to hire private detectives. If I had my inheritance in hand, I'd have done it right there and then, but I couldn't put my hands on $100 to save my life." "Did he ask you to give him money or to hire a detective?" Nancy asked. "Or did he suggest you hire one yourself?" "I can't leave my room, you know," Ira replied. "Edgar was going to take care of all the details," he said. Nancy had her own private idea just how much detective hire Ira would have got for his money, but she said nothing. "So you see, your suspicions were all wrong," Ira continued. "Did Edgar say where he was stopping?" Nancy asked. "Yes, there's no secret about that," Ira went on eagerly. "He's boarding up in Stafford. He even gave me the address. I have written it down here. Wait a minute. Hello? Here it is. He boards with a family named Himmler in Harrison." So in that day, there weren't a lot of hotels or motels. So people went to the equivalent of like a bed and breakfast. They stayed in somebody's house and paid rent to stay in the room. "Well, that certainly seems to clear Edgar," Nancy said. "I knew all along the lad wasn't bad," Ira said triumphantly. "He's my father's son, after all. He couldn't be a crook." "Don't excite yourself now," Nancy cautioned, "and I'll be around to see you the first chance I have." I did not get a chance to look in at the guinea pigs on account of Mr. Cutter arriving. What did he want, by the way? He just asked me a lot of questions. If you remember, Mr. Cutter was the mean person who is Ira Dixon's boss, and he had come over right as Nancy was leaving the last time. So then goodbye. I didn't have a chance to look at the guinea pigs on account of Mr. Cutter arriving. What did he want, by the way? He just asked me a lot of questions, Ira said. Where and how and why, those kinds of questions. Then goodbye until the next time, Mr. Dixon, Nancy said, catching sight of Hannah making despairing gestures in the dining room. Goodbye, Miss Nancy. Thank you for being good to an old man, Dixon said. Nancy hung up the receiver. And now I hope we can eat without further interruption, she said, seating herself at the table and starting on her bouillon with vigor. Finally, she gets to eat. I'm so weak. I haven't strength to bite, poor Bess declared. That's terrible sheets, woman, Nancy. How could you keep your temper? What good would getting angry have done? Nancy asked. And this way, I have a new clue. A clue to what? The missing mail pouch? Bess asked incredulously. I can't say that word. No, another mystery, Nancy said. Another? Gracious, Nancy, our mystery's getting so commonplace you must have two or three on a string at once. Both of these came to me uninvited, Nancy smiled, munching her toast cheese sandwich. She told Bess of the contents of her letter from England and how she had hurried with a reply, assuring the lawyers that she would help them find the missing heiress. I should have a better chance than anybody else in discovering the other Nancy Drew, she explained. If anybody who ever heard of the other Nancy were to meet me, the similarities in names would probably be mentioned right away. Oh, and Mrs. Sheets did mention another Nancy Drew, cried Bess. That's just it, you see, Nancy laughed. I found a clue by keeping the reins tight on my temper. I don't pretend for a minute that woman didn't make me absolutely furious. I think I should have pulled her hair out, Bess confessed. The nervy old thing. She certainly has no kind of thoughts about modern young women, has she? Oh, well, remember that couple at Redgate Farm last summer? Nancy smiled reminiscently. They thought the world ought to come to an end because young folks didn't know their places anymore. But they sang a different tune after the Sheet and Pillowcase Club was rounded up and put in jail. So that is another book that we may have to read if it includes something called the Sheet and Pillowcase Club. Yeah, that may be on our reading list. I'll never forget that black snake colony, Bess declared fervently, especially after we joined it without invitation. Oh my God, another reason to read that book. Black Snake Colony, yikes. Aside from all that, just imagine, Bess, I'm going to the big game Monday. You mean the Emerson State U game? Bess cried. Oh, how I envy you. I suppose Ned Nickerson asked you. Yes, Nancy confessed. He came last night and asked Dad if I might go up with his parents. After the game, there are to be the theatricals. The Merchants of Venice is going to be given by the College Drama Society. And Merchant of Venice is a famous old play that's written by Shakespeare, famous old writer. And I suppose Ned, being quarterback on the team, will play also the part of Portia. That's a famous woman in the Merchant of Venice play. No, you old silly. Imagine a 6-foot Portia with a bass voice. Ned is in the play, but his part is not important, Nancy replied. I think he said it was going to be shouts and murmurs off the stage. So when people used to play in the extra parts of plays, they would just be in the background, sort of making it seem as if there's something going on. The girls brought their luncheon to a merry conclusion. I must hurry to the bank to draw $10 from Mrs. Sheets, Nancy said. Want to ride along? Indeed, Bess agreed. All I came for was to get the latest information on the robbery, and what entertainment I got instead. It takes all sorts of people to make a world, it said, remarked Nancy. I never could understand, though, why it was necessary to have Edgar Dixon and Mrs. Sheets and such people in the world. It would be a better world without them. Then what would you do for mysteries? Bess laughed. You would have to go to Mars or some other planet to find mysteries. Yes, and what would my father do for a living? Nancy agreed. I guess the unusual folks, the bad ones, both have their purposes, but I'd rather have a dad and, even a mailman like good old Mr. Dixon. If everybody in the world were as good and kind as he is. He can't make the world over, Nancy, dear, Bess counseled. So let's go to the bank for the money, or you won't be able to keep your promise. On the way down, you can tell me about the latest developments in the great United States mail robbery. You're right, Bess, Nancy cried, throwing on her exquisitely furred coat. Let's go. Bess took her place beside Nancy in the waiting roadster and settled herself under the rug as Nancy took the wheel. There aren't any good developments in the case. I went to see Mr. Dixon this morning, but that little boy seems to want to speak to you, Bess. He's running after us and waving his hands. Nancy put on the brakes and looked around. Little Tommy was racing down the street as fast as his chubby little legs could carry him. I saw him, he shouted. I saw him. That's the end of the chapter.